We are discussing Sam Dalrymple's book Shattered Lands this week. And through this book, we are trying to understand how the British India was partitioned in the 20th century, multiple times that is, and how that changed the maps of many parts of Asia, all the way from the Middle East to Burma. So far, we saw how the British India that got partitioned from Burma or these Gulf states such as Yemen or Kuwait or Dubai. And then there was this question of princely states, and that's the fourth partition that the author talks about. So let's come to that. We are in 1947. India has gained its independence, and now the then newly formed government of India is trying to get hold of a number of princely states. Remember, the India, in terms of its geography, the map that we have today, it wasn't the same as it was on 15th August 1947 when it gained its independence. And so was the case with Pakistan. So both these countries, they were trying to get hold of these different princely states. And by September, a number of princely states they had willingly acceded to India, but not a single one had successfully joined Pakistan. And there were a number of reasons for that. One was, of course, the geography. A number of these princely states were surrounded by the newly formed India, and they couldn't have gone to Pakistan. But then there were exceptions there as well. For example, there was this really small princely state of called Dujana right outside Delhi, then in the province of Punjab, and the ruler of it, Nawab of Dujana, was a Muslim. And just like many other places in North India, here also the communal riots were going on back then between Hindus and Muslims, Sikhs and Muslims. And that's when the Nawab decided that he wanted the state to become a part of Pakistan. But Pakistan did not accept its appeal because Pakistan felt that having a princely state surrounded all over by India right next to Delhi would not be a good idea. But only a few days later, interestingly, Jinnah, the then leader of Pakistan, he accepted the first accession of another non-contiguous state, which was called Junagadh. And I'm sure many of you would have heard about it. So, Junagadh at the time, it was the fourth largest Muslim ruled state in the British Raj, and it lay pretty much in the current Gujarat as we know it. And on one side there was Arabian Sea, and on the other side it was surrounded by many Indian states. So the accession story of Junagadh, it's quite an interesting one. But like many other accession stories, most of the Indians, they are not familiar with how it really happened. So let's talk about that. There was the Nawab of Junagadh, and he was quite an interesting character. And there were all kinds of stories about his obsession with dogs. It was said that he had around 800 dogs, and for each dog he had a separate servant. Then some of his favorite dogs, they were wearing jewels. Sometimes they were being married, these dogs. Many of these stories might be exaggerated, but that's what we keep hearing. Also, the Nawab had a great taste for the lions in the region, and he made a lot of effort to preserve the lion population there. What about his kingdom, his policies? Well, he established a multi faith court, a kind of a semi welfare state, and he also made sure that there was free primary education for all kinds of people in his little kingdom. At the same time, he banned the slaughter of cows, of course, to please or appease to the Hindu population. And as I said, he worked towards animal conservation. In fact, it was the only land outside Africa where lions could roam freely in the wild. Then, what about the accession? What he wanted? Well, there is some evidence that initially he wanted to join India. But then he changed his mind when his prime minister convinced him that the newly formed government of India, or the Congress party, they would not really let him preserve his animals, let him enjoy his luxuries, and so he was a bit hesitant. On the other hand, when he got in touch with the Pakistani ruling authorities, he was assured that Pakistan would not allow Junagadh to be tyrannized, and the Nawab would have a lot of luxuries and his rights would remain intact. So that's when he decided to accede his state to Pakistan. The reaction, it was going to be outrageous in India and inside Junagadh as well, because most of the population inside Junagadh was Hindu. In fact, around 82% of it was Hindu, and then at the same time, some of the most sacred pilgrimage sites, such as Somnath and Dwarka, they were there. But then there was this larger philosophical kind of question, and this question also applied to some other significant princely states such as Hyderabad or Kashmir. The problem here was the rulers were of one faith and most of the public was of a different faith, and based on that, it was very difficult for the rulers to go either way, because rulers wanted to go based on their faith, but the public had a different reaction. So how do you square that? That was the larger question. It was the larger question in Kashmir as well as Hyderabad, which we will discuss later. So what did India do? India's home minister at the time was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and he sent his defense force to surround Junagadh and kind of send the signal that we are going to take control over it. Although what they said was at the time that this was just to maintain law and order situation. What the Indian government at the time was doing was making sure, if they wanted to get the accession of these princely states, they were making sure that inside that state there is a lot of public noise, public voices are there to join India. And then once situation or the law and order situation got really bad, they would send their forces and then somehow bring down the regime and get the accession signed. In this case also, they tried diplomatic negotiations first, but then they went in a different way. Junagadh at the time had 4 vassal states, and their status had never quite been worked out. So the idea was to bribe some of them, and they started with Mangrol and bribed the ruler there. And once the deed was signed, in fact, the ruler then tried to go back and disagree with the accidents. The forces were sent once again, and it was made sure that the state has been acceded to India. And then there were other political maneuvers that some of these governments in exile, they were formed, and the pressure was built on the state to make sure that they acceded to India. There was a lot of tension at the border of the newly formed India and these princely states, and skirmishes were going on constantly. And it was then, when all this violence was going on, there was pressure from the Indian forces that the Nawab of Junagadh, he hoped that he would get some help from Pakistan. But he did not. Pakistan was not going to risk a fully fledged war with India over the state. And also at the time, there was a lot of confidence in Pakistan, in the leadership, that they will eventually acquire both Hyderabad and Kashmir. So they did not really pay a lot of attention to the state of Junagadh. So far, the Indian position had been that a plebiscite need to be held in all these regions, and the people need to decide where they want to go. It's not the rulers, it's the people. They need to decide whether they would like to join India or Pakistan. It was supposed to be a democratic process. And eventually, when the plebiscite was held here in Junagadh, a few months later, that is, um, the state overwhelmingly, they decided to join India. And that's how the fate of this state was sealed. But now let's come to the other side of the story, the Kashmir. Here, the opposite was the case. The ruler was Hindu and most of the population was Muslim. In fact, most of the Kashmiris in the valley, they did not consider this rule legitimate, because the Dogra dynasty that was currently ruling there, it had come from the Jammu Valley in the south of the state, and they had rather bought this this region, or the right to rule this region, for 7.5 million rupees from the East India Company. So it wasn't really a stable rule. People never quite accepted it. And to make matters worse, during the Dogra rule, the economic activity had gone really bad. Other than the demographic factor that Kashmir had a majority population, Muslim population, it also made economic sense to for it to join Pakistan, because most of its exports, they went to Pakistan at the time. But there were a couple of problems, and a big one. First, of course, as I said, the ruling Dogra dynasty, they would not have liked it. And second, the on ground voices, or the politics that was shaping up in the valley, and the leader in that was Sheikh Abdullah. He had these communist leanings, and in a way that went along with the idea of Nehru's socialism. So, whether it was the monarchy there, or the democratic politics that was shaping up the leaders of that, neither of these two parties wanted to join Pakistan. But what about the people? What did they want? Well, nobody could ever find out, because the plebiscite that never happened. Interestingly, there was some pressure on the rulers to conduct plebiscite. Both Gandhi and Jinnah, they urged him to let Kashmiris determine their own future. But for the time being, the ruler thought that it would be a good idea to keep the state independent and have its autonomy. That was the position on paper. On the ground, situation was different, because in Punjab there had been riots going on back then, and the Jammu province, which was right next to Punjab, there also those riots had spread. So this is what the Statesman editor at the time wrote about what was going on there. He said, in the Jammu province, within a period of about 11 weeks, systematic savageries practically eliminated the entire Muslim element in the population, amounting to 500,000 people. About 200,000 just disappeared, remaining untraceable, having presumably been butchered or died from epidemics. The rest fled destitute to West Punjab. When asked about this particular thing that was going on, the Maharaja, he blamed Pakistan for the anti-Muslim violence and didn't take any responsibility. But then there were parts in the state, such as Poonch, which was highly pro-Pakistan then, and there were a lot of anti-Maharaja sentiments. People did not buy that, and there was uprising among the Muslims of Poonch, and the violence erupted there as well. So what happened was a lot of people who were pro-Pakistan back then, they encouraged Pakistani authorities to help them and create law and order situation in the Jammu Kashmir region eventually, so that the Pakistan could take over, and they sought help for it. What the Pakistan did was, at that time, it did not help them directly, but kind of indirectly helped these rebels, and sent some tribals, some mujahideen, and they were supposed to go to different parts of Kashmir and create law and order situation and make it difficult for the Maharaja. And this was a decision which was then taken in 1948, but in a way it still shapes the politics of Kashmir even today, because this idea of jihad in Kashmir and sending those fanatic Muslims into Kashmir, that has been the state policy right from the beginning for Pakistan. And what did these people do when they entered different parts of Kashmir? They just looted and did all kind of violence. Particularly, they made sure that they looted the wealth of Hindus and Sikhs, and they particularly target these two communities, making sure that mostly the Muslims were left in the valley. And they kept marching on until they reached at a place called Baramulla, which was just an hour from the capital city, Srinagar. And they stopped there. They stopped for quite some time. They were supposed to go further, but why did they stop there for too long? That's the question that nobody has been able to answer so far. Because what happened because of that pause was Maharaja got some time. He reached out to Delhi and called on the Prime Minister and the Home Minister to get some help from them. And the Indian state, they made sure that Maharaja signed the instrument of accession, that now Jammu and Kashmir become the part of Indian Union, and that's when they sent their forces. And when eventually all the law and order situation was taken under control and peace prevailed, peace relatively speaking that is, at that time in November, Mountbatten made this simple proposal to Jinnah. He said that if he persuaded these tribals, these mujahideens to withdraw, they could then jointly hold a Junagadh-like plebiscite in Kashmir and let the Kashmiris decide for themselves who they wanted to join. And in fact, India didn't have any problem with that, because at the time Hyderabad case was still pending. There also the ruler wanted to be independent, so India thought maybe Pakistan could have Kashmir and India could keep Hyderabad. But Jinnah didn't agree, and had he agreed, Pakistan would have got Kashmir at that time, but he didn't. And what he said was that he had lost trust in Mountbatten, and he wasn't particularly sure that this was going to be a good idea. So the case of Kashmir still remained pending. Eventually, the two parties, India and Pakistan, came to this agreement that India would withdraw most of its forces. Pakistan would try to persuade the rebels, their forces, to cease fighting, and the United Nations would then send a commission to Kashmir to make recommendations on on the best way to go ahead with the plebiscite. But once again, that could never happen because there was this violence still going on. Population from Indian side that was going to Kashmir, from Pakistani side that was going into Kashmir, and it was very difficult to determine the demography of the region. And eventually, those conditions could never prevail, even till this day. And eventually, India and Pakistan, in the next year, they fought a war over this. They fought several wars over this, and yet the state is still the same. Most part of the Jammu and Kashmir region, that's with India. Some part of it is with Pakistan, and therein divides the line, which is called the line of control, on either side of which are the two forces, and we still don't have a fixed border. So that was the story of the princely state of Kashmir. Now come to the story of the Hyderabad princely state. By the end of 1948 March, this landlocked state of Hyderabad was the only princely state that was significant in any sense, and whose relationship either with India and Pakistan, it was unresolved at the time. It was established by the old Mughal Subedars of the Deccan, and it was kind of a fragment of the Mughal Empire that had somehow survived into the 20th century. And as I told you the last time, its ruler, the Nizam of Hyderabad at the time, in 1930s, 1937, 38, it was at the time the richest man in the world. Rather, he became the richest man of the world after the death of J.D. Rockefeller. And the state itself was quite rich, and the income and expenditure of the people was quite high. The economy was pretty good, but then it faced the same question because the rulers were Muslim, the most majority population was Hindu, and eventually the question of joining India or Pakistan, that was there. But Nizam had, the ruler, Nizam had different ideas. In fact, his idea was quite radical. He planned to transform Hyderabad into the seat of global Islamic caliphate. And he wanted his dynasty to become the leader of Sunni Islam across the world. And for that reason also, he married his sons to the daughters of the Ottoman Caliph. And then through them, he nominated their joint grandchildren as the next caliphs of Islam. So he was having those revivalist ideas in his head. But like many other monarchies in the world, the Nizam had made this mistake that a certain population of his state was really poor, and instead of helping them and enabling them to improve their economic status, he had burdened them with heavy taxes. So that meant that there was going to be a lot of protests, a lot of voices that were going to go against the rule. And it was eventually going to determine the future of the state. What happened then was, in August, the Nizam offered India a treaty of association. He wanted to have his independent state, but kind of association with India. But India rejected the idea, saying that they wanted accession on their own terms and they wanted full control of the territory. And then it also made sense because from all sides it was landlocked by India. But then there was the Pakistani factor also, and Jinnah had warned Mountbatten that if Congress attempted to exert any pressure on Hyderabad, every Muslim throughout the whole of India, he would rise as a force to defend this oldest Muslim dynasty in India. But as the politics, as you know, it's It's a really complicated affair, and so it was. The relationship of Jinnah with the Nizam wasn't really great either. It was said that during a rare meeting of Jinnah with the Nizam in the year 1946, Jinnah had spread his legs and lit a cigar, and that meant Nizam had got pissed off. And the Nizam said, "Is this the way you behave with the Nizam of Hyderabad?" And that made Jinnah apologize, but the relationship never quite recovered from there. On the other side, India knew that a majority of the population would most likely go with India, so they offered this idea of plebiscite to Nizam, but he did not agree with that at the time, and he said he made his consent to only a standstill agreement, that is, things remained as per the status quo. So while all this conflict kind of situation was going on, Hyderabad from its side was trying to make sure that it could hold its ground against the Indian forces. And for that, they tried different things. For example, one Hyderabadi general, El Idrus, he was trying to smuggle weapons from abroad. And he was in London for that matter. And somehow Mountbatten saw him, and he made sure that he sent him back to India, and other precautions were taken. Similarly, there was this story of another person, another Australian pilot called Sydney Cotton. He traveled to Hyderabad, and he got close to the Hyderabadi leadership, and he thought that he could help Hyderabad get some military help from Pakistan. He could fly the planes and bring in weaponry, and that would help the state of Hyderabad. Then there was this paramilitary group that had come up in Hyderabad. It was called Majlis-e Ittihadul Muslimin, MIM, and this was really the organization that gave birth to today's AIMIM, whose leader is Asaduddin Owaisi. And the militants that this group had, they were called Razakars, and the Nizam had to rely on them for the support at that time. But remember, it was a Muslim group, and there was a lot of rhetoric that they were really against Hindus, and in fact, a lot of times through their speeches, through their actions, they went against the Hindu population. And just like many other parts of North India, here also in the South, this religious polarization and riots, those kind of situations had arisen. Also remember, because after partition of India and Pakistan, a lot of Hindus have traveled from Pakistan to India. Similarly, Muslims have traveled from India to Pakistan. But at the same time, a lot of Muslims who were facing some kind of troubles in different parts of India, they had moved into this state of Hyderabad. And because these religious tensions were going on in Hyderabad, a lot of Hindus had also moved out of it. Then there were a number of protests, particularly communist protests that were growing in the state of Hyderabad. So that was a different political force that was emerging. And coming to the political scene of India, so much had changed. Gandhi had died, Patel had died, and now Jinnah had also died. So when the tensions really arose between the state of India and the state of Hyderabad, and India started sending its forces, initially there was this apprehension that there was going to be a lot of bloodshed. The Razakars would go on, the public would also support the state of Hyderabad, and there will be a lot of trouble. But that didn't quite happen. Also, there was this expectation based on the media and all the hype that was coming from Hyderabad that the Hyderabad's army, they have got aeroplanes, they had got some kind of air force, But it turned out that was just some kind of dummy aeroplanes made of bamboos and other things to convince the India that they had an air force and they had some kind of massive weaponry. They didn't have it. And they didn't have it because India had the advantage of having the land, the landlocked situation with Hyderabad, where it surrounded Hyderabad from all sides. So no help could come from the outside through the land or air. They had the complete control, so they could easily then made sure that the Hyderabad state of Hyderabad that acceded to India, and that really happened. So the situation got sorted. Indian army eventually banned Razakars, and eventually they were able to put down the communist armed struggle. All of that was taken care of, and the state was acceded to India and became a part of India, and that's where we are. So that was the story of some of the most important princely states of India and how they got partitioned, how they got acceded, and that's what we find out in this book. Now, in the next episode, I will talk about the final partition of the Indian subcontinent, where Bangladesh got the status of independence from Pakistan when it was partitioned from Pakistan. So that's the last partition story. I wouldn't call it the final one because I don't know. It might turn out that we have more partitions in the region. So we'll talk about the Bangladesh-Pakistan partition in the next episode, and I hope you will keep following and keep enjoying these stories from the history of India. Thank you very much for listening.